and welcome to End of the World News, the podcast. Today we have a special guest, Austin Picard from the Underclass podcast. I don't know why I skipped on that or blanked on that. Austin, how you doing today, sir?
Man, I'm doing great, brother. I appreciate you having me on. I feel like this conversation has been a long time coming, and I just noticed I've been watching you from a distance for quite some time as far as your content and following your content, and it's hilarious how much I just find this this self-serving sense of gratification whenever I come across one of your videos because it does seem to fall perfectly in line with reinforcing many of the ideas that I have kind of come to embrace in the way I interpret the modern influencer industrial complex and things of that nature. And so every time that you provide another window and avenue into the layers of corruption behind kind of the powers that be that perfectly orchestrate and place their political assets into position. Yeah, it just yeah. Again, I couldn't be more grateful to feel like I'm not alone in the trenches. You know what I'm saying? And so I appreciate you, brother.
Well, the feeling is mutual, and I think my viewers are going to love this episode because when it comes to how this world works, the mechanics of the control system, I don't think there's many people who know it better than you. So let's just
Thank you.
first start about a little bit about yourself and where they can find you.
Awesome, brother. Yeah. So I'm the host of the Underclass podcast, as you mentioned, and really, I think I began the show around April of 2023. So it's still very much in its infancy. It feels like to me, and it's all still feels very new, and I'm trying to kind of I don't know at just along this sort of I don't know, path that I find myself on. I'm just kind of reminding myself at every turn to reflect on really what I focus on more than anything is kind of interpreting the intention behind the individuals that I come into contact with and have conversations with. And it feels like for really the vast majority of those engagements and opportunities, man, I couldn't be more grateful due to the people I feel like I've surrounded myself with that are very willing and open-minded to objectively pursue these ideas and not quite find themselves so bogged down in ideology and these ideological prisons that are keeping them unable to use just critical thinking skills in general, let alone understand the dynamics of power and how the power paradigm has been very well entrenched systematically for generations. And I think it's really perfect because the Gladio umbrella, right? You kind of mentioned Gladio as being one of the priorities as far as the subject. It makes sense because of how much I feel like the strategy of tension plagues society at large in modern day. And so I view so many of the scandals post World War II that have really, I believe, been facilitated by that very same network that was kind of really, I believe, the established, well entrenched aspect of this network really fell into place perfectly right after World War II, whenever you had these Nazi rat lines being effectively exploited, and you kind of had this power cabal of what I believe is now this modern gladio government, that many people are focusing on these political puppets, and I believe them to be largely actors within the construct of the political theater itself to again leverage the pageantry against the low level kind of frequency minded general public, sort of just the masses that are unfortunately being targeted by this level of propaganda. And
Awesome.
so to yeah, I mean, I could go on forever describing the network that is Gladio and the effect that it has definitely had upon us as far as just the social fabric of modern society. But yeah, where do you want to start, honestly, buddy?
Well, I want to start off with Gladio. So, what is it? Who are the players involved? And when did it
Awesome.
start?
Okay, so basically, it's interesting to me because I think the Phoenix program and so many of the mind control programs that developed, really were kind of a product of Gladio, right? And as far as these stay behind paramilitary networks that were very well established by NATO and the Allied forces, right? Post World War II, allegedly to kind of defend against the Soviet threat that was looming large post World War II. With allegedly, that is kind of the pretext and justification for this very clandestine international network, I believe. When in reality, it was kind of just a manufactured pretext. I feel like more than anything, not saying that you know there wasn't some sort of communist threat, but to act as if they don't utilize communism as an ideological tool, to subvert Western society, it seems to be very naive if you're not kind of under that, at least. Yeah, I feel like it should be very much just acknowledged by now that it's clearly ideological warfare playing out. I mean, what did Yuri Bezmenov call it back in 1984 when he's interviewing with G. Edward Griffin? He says ideological subversion, the four stages he begins to explain, and the very first stage was demoralization. And I always point to that because I do believe there is this just extraordinary cycle of demoralization that plays out in the media cycle, on a daily basis. And one of the key priorities is to keep us in that heightened emotional state where we're very much at each other's throats within the context of the culture war, focusing on these low hanging fruit agenda items that don't necessarily, uh, in any way, spotlight kind of the true nature of the state and also the underlying root causes of everything that seems to be effectively disrupting society at large. So I think when you look at Gladio itself, really the way I described it when I covered, I believe it was in my Concora episode, because the Concora scandal really rocked, Ireland, and no, I believe that the MI5 and MI6 basically were running this major psychological operation and clandestine covert operation with joint intelligence agencies that were coexisting in this kind of agenda of subversion, and really they were trying to basically create a sort of civil war environment in Ireland at the time and completely just disrupt, just kind of. It's the strategy of tension, the same sort of thing that played out in Belgium, right? And so to actually see Northern Ireland and to see this conflict play out and be fully exploited by outside intelligence, the sort of intelligence apparatus that very much kind of manufactures these clandestine agendas to really stage one regime change operations, right, to place in their own strategic puppets for obviously the ultimate agenda at play. But also you have these kind of layered agendas playing out within the context of the operation itself that's disrupting the state of Ireland at the time. And it was just interesting to me because I described it as there's really no distinction between CIA, Mossad, MI5, right? British or French intelligence. I mean, honestly, this seems to be just one shadow cabal of the global elites hiding behind this curtain of really it seems like a puppet master is pulling the strings at all times, and that is why I very much describe this power cabal as utilizing the politicians or public representatives as political actors in this sort of yeah, propagandistic theater. But they don't recognize national borders in any way, and that's another thing that I kind of outlined in that sort of context. And so it feels like just in terms of American really intelligence, just in general, it is one whole perverse network that leads into the other. So I view it as aristocratic families, dynastic generational assets, right? That really hold dual loyalty to secret fraternal organizations of powerful influence, and utilize these paramilitary organizations and also these what seem to be underground cult organizations as well, right? To achieve their ends, and that in every way. is the systematic playbook that I see recycled over time. And there always seems to inevitably be some sort of credible window into a gladio layer that seems to be reinforced throughout the process of investigating these major scandals and mass kind of let's just say um, not mass casualty events, but there's another term that is escaping me, but you understand what I'm saying. And essentially, I view it as a global intelligence apparatus, and this is really it's operating as a private army, right, with the only goal of basically reinforcing and enforcing this covert agenda of the international aristocracy. So in no way do I view um, any of these modern tactics of espionage, or let's even say like a window into the Epstein network, as utilizing sexual blackmail as a tool, to kind of exploit these corrupt assets that you obviously rely upon to one sort of misdirect the public into usually facilitating this dystopian agenda, and honestly kind of ushering in their own. It's almost self-defeating in every way as far as the policy positions that will I just witness so very often, even within the context of my own family. As much as I love them, it's it's sad to see how many of them will just pick one solid issue that they seem to focus on as the rep as really the face and the complete representation of their principles and ideology in general. And but if you pick just you just kind of scratch the surface a little bit, and it seems like there's almost a level of intimidation due to the lack of commitment as in terms of understanding their own core values. And that alone is, I think, it's kind of the red flag that we should all notice,
You
at
know what? You're
face
spot
value.
on with that. Even with my own father, right, who, he knows all about 1984. He was, a libertarian, but he's so bogged down in this tribalism. It's crazy.
Right.
And what I always tell people is you don't have to worry about where these, a-holes disagree. You got to worry about where they agree because that's the real agenda. And they all have the same corporate masters, right? And who controls the corporations, like you were talking about, these royal families of generational wealth. So these intelligence services do not work for the people or even the government, really. They work for these royal bloodlines. And I think you can take it back. I don't know what your spiritual beliefs are or whatever, but the minute you start talking about how there were these paramilitary organizations working directly for these royal bloodlines, it immediately brought me back to Deuteronomy 32, and that goes to the Tower of Babel when God created the nation, supposedly, and they assigned a lowercase god to rule over each one of them, and they created these bloodlines, right? And I
Right.
think it's these bloodlines that control all the nations that are with these paramilitary organizations, like you spoke of.
That makes so much sense, buddy. I think that is really my goal at all times, is to spotlight, well, honestly, to remind anyone who, and I'm not saying I have any of the solid answers or solutions for what is legitimately disrupting society, but I do believe that we should all prioritize discernment in terms of who is the true power broker and who are their political puppets. And that alone is just something that I think it should be of utmost importance in terms of how you are just one interpreting, the power paradigm in general, and who is actually the face of the policies, and then who behind this, as far as the permanent establishment is concerned, is sort of once again leveraging their political assets in order to facilitate these dystopian principles upon us, and also completely subvert our moral values as a society in general in the West. And I think you look at the Tavistock Institute and the Frankfurt School, you understand the structure of the public school system dating back to the Prussian model, and understanding what the purpose of that was to really create a subservient population, right? To legitimately condition your populace to the peasant class, right? Which that is another thing that and the reason why I named my podcast The Underclass was because I truly believe we share a common enemy. And this common enemy, it truly represents the most sadistic and sinister aspects of humanity in general, and also the depravity and the links of, as far as the depths of depravity these individual perpetrators are willing to go. And I think that is what provides the individual talent spotters, let's say recruiters for this permanent structure that has been very well established, that they go around searching for these character profiles that fit, perfectly within the context of you will be a useful asset. And when the time comes, we will choose to crucify you for public purposes and perception alone, or, we will continually exploit you until your dying breath. But honestly, I feel like that is, this sort of, it's almost like, if you realize the gifted program and things of that nature that they utilize in order to kind of, I believe that's why so many children have these, they can barely remember, but they'll have these meetings with these suits that come into the school, and they sit down with them and have a one-on-one, and they kind of isolate what exactly characteristics that they, seem to present, and if they actually check the boxes that are necessary to become some sort of useful asset in the future. And I mean, they've had so many different youth organizations where they kind of utilize this playbook in terms of JCs, right? The Junior Chamber of Commerce is, or Junior Chamber of Commerce is one of those, and I believe John Wayne Gacy was a member with Ed Kemper, and that is fascinating to me, right? Because and by the way, I didn't mention there's an interesting chronology if you read Operation Gladio by Paul Williams, The Unholy Alliance, I believe is what it's called. And I love the title because he calls it the unholy alliance between the Vatican, the CIA, and the mafia. Is that not every single aspect of the network that we sort of just described? In itself, it's chronologically kind of organized within the forefront of the book, and he offers this strange kind of bridge into, right, the Vatican Bank, Lucky Luciano, recruited by O&I, and this happens by 1942. So this is right at the tail end of World War II. And you have Operation Husky take place by 43, and this is further reinforcing the network and the stay behind networks in general. And then you have the full formation of Gladio by 45 at the Fort Hunter Conference. And so Angleton, which we now know, obviously, would, if you didn't know by now, which I know you do, but as far as just the connections of the newly released JFK files that obviously were, I think, publicly misrepresented in many ways, because this was really just further filling in holes that as far as certain details of things that we already effectively knew. And that's interesting to me. Not saying that we didn't learn anything new at all, but I do think it's interesting to see that James Jesus Sangleton, these individuals that obviously were usual suspects, are now being kind of fully chastised, or whatever you want to call it, tarred and feathered in the public spotlight. And so in a certain way, I do appreciate whenever we get that vindication, but I will say they seem to very effectively misdirect the public by at the end of the day in terms of the consequential outcome of it all. So yeah, I never really hold out too much hope as far as in any sort of real structured change or shift in the power structure in general happening due to some. I think the vast majority of this true of the actual, let's say, power cabal are insulated from accountability in general, and have really developed a system to further kind of just cultivate that consequential reality in terms of really just a miscarriage of justice in every way. If you're attached to any sort of real network that does have pull behind the scenes, and so that's why you see so many of these cases that are just, fully infiltrated at the local level, and they'll disrupt the legal process through, appointing these corrupt prosecutors or whatever the case may be, even infiltrating your legal team, which happens so often. That happened to Wayne Williams in the Atlanta child murders, which another Gladio window, because there was Iran Contra was running through the Hatfield Air Force Base, or International Airport there in Georgia. And I mean, it's a fact. They were utilizing a paramilitary organization that was linked up with the KKK in the area, and they were legitimately smuggling not only weapons, but trafficking drugs, everything you could imagine, while also utilizing an occult organization in the area to help with the sadistic, sinister aspect of child sex trafficking.
Can you get into
So there
that,
you go.
please? You want to get into that?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, no
'Cause
problem.
that's
I
new to
mean,
me, but it is crazy how they have these areas or these places that are used for different operations. And then when you
yep.
dive into them, you're like, wait a minute, they used it for this, they used it for that, they used it for this. This was 100% an operation pulling through.
Absolutely. And I'm telling you, Atlanta was just mind blowing whenever I took that deep dive into the Atlanta child murders, because it seems to be that there was some sort of and this plays into it, reminded me so much of the Fort Bragg murders as well, and just knowing that Dr. Jeffrey McDonald, who allegedly murdered his family, right, killed his wife and his two daughters. I believe honestly he was potentially blowing the whistle on the cadaver connection of that was this well established covert operation with what I believe to have been a sort of extension of a Gladio network that was smuggling weapons and trafficking drugs as well, and they were utilizing and by the way, this same network links into the Son of Sam case, right, in upstate New York, where they were apparently smuggling in heroin through the medical supplies. So it makes sense that one of the priority murders that David Berkowitz was allegedly responsible for as a sole perpetrator, although he claims, and many others do as well around the case, that one of the murders that took place was that woman who worked for the medical supplies company who was potentially blowing the whistle on this drug trafficking operation. And so basically she was a priority target within the context of the network. And so the 22 Disciples of Hell, who David Berkowitz was linked to as a kind of local chapter of the Process Church of the Final Judgment, they were apparently very much in league with the local criminal organization running this drug trafficking operation off of military bases, working together with the military police at the base and the narcotics officers who were very much corrupt within the local police departments. And so whenever she was potentially considering blowing the whistle, she is killed outside of the Elephas Club, which is a cult in general, as far as a layered ritual sacrifice. At Eliphas Levi, these strange connections to obviously these ideological principles that these occult networks seem to exercise. And what did David Berkowitz claim, and others who were a part of that network, is that there were up to three people who committed that murder, and there were at least three people that were even still in the van whenever the murder took place. And they had a camera on a tripod in the van that was set up to film the murder as a snuff film that they would then facilitate within the context of the enterprise itself. And so it makes sense to me that so much of this is factored into these networks, and especially, as I mentioned, the plausible deniability aspect of using these occult organizations, because at the leadership level, you know, I do believe that there's very much an active, let's say, exercising of the occult principles and the ritualistic nature of the belief system itself. But also, I think there's a level of the leadership that are kind of exploiting the initiates, the lower level initiates, to then kind of hang them out to dry in this sort of context, and create plausible patsies for many of these criminal cases as well.
Can I ask
And
you a
then,
question real quick?
mhm.
Um, why do you think that these demonic killings or child sex trafficking or child rituals within the occult organizations are always tied to like gun running or trafficking? Is it to kind of run cover for when it all blows up? They say, "Hey, look at here," and don't pay attention to all this other stuff we were doing.
I think that's a part of it. I think that whenever it is convenient in terms of what they can shift attention to within the context of these criminal cases. But also, I think it's just a matter of the well, I believe that the black market is sort of structured and facilitated and really controlled by the intelligence apparatus. And so I think that, you know, basically the reason why we've had this war on drugs effectively for as long as it, even now, these narco cartels were utilizing this propaganda to try and stage a pretext to invade Venezuela. It's just, how many times have we seen these ridiculous tactics of the economic hitman at play? But it just in no way were we unscathed by that very same clandestine operational process. And to feel as if a Western society or America in general or the United States in any way is kind of isolated from that consequential outcome of the international criminal syndicate and intelligence apparatus that we described earlier. I mean, that's just almost naive at this point, I feel. And we've seen so many different levels of examples in terms of sheep dipped off operatives that are clearly trained and drenched in espionage as far as these sophisticated tactics of psychological operations. And I mean, Tim McVeigh always comes to mind because he's such a great example of explaining that. One, I believe the reason he was going to a dental office all the time, way too often, frequenting this dental office, which seemed to have very strange ties to the mind war agenda playing out as far as the MK Ultra nature of utilizing these implants, right? Which you would basically have a molar that was implanted with a sort of microchip style of control mechanism, where they could basically kind of utilize this not only this legitimate technological tool, but also they would implement this chemical warfare aspect of this perfect kind of pharmaceutical recipe with a combination of hypnotism or hypnosis and uh, and then I believe that this is the reason why Jolly on West was going to meet with Tim McVeigh just before his public execution, allegedly public execution, which
Mhm.
clearly we believe that, at least I'm under the impression that we're not quite certain whether Tim McVeigh was killed that day. And also it's very strange how they tried to run misdirection with the firsts, right, which were allegedly taking his body to the final destination. And then he spent his entire time on, as far as his last days, incarcerated, trying to make sure that his legal representation would confirm his father would not be able to get a hold of his autopsy or actually, have an autopsy performed on his body. And that's just a very strange kind of, you know, just as far as priority in terms of what you're focused on doing before you are given the lethal injection. But also the fact that he was breathing allegedly after he was given the lethal injection, and the woman who was there attending the death was like, yeah, no one knows whether he was actually dead or not because he was still breathing when they pulled up that sheet. But yeah, in terms of this is my favorite example as far as like when I did the Ultimate Evil episode on the Process Church of the Final Judgment, I covered Henry Lee Lucas and the Hand of Death cult for a brief moment at the beginning of my episode. And it was also interesting to me, by the way, when I found out after I did the episode that the very same correctional institution that Henry Lee Lucas attended, where he allegedly was trained in these behavioral modification experimentation programs, that were being ran there. It was Chillicothe, I believe is how you pronounce it, is the name of the correctional institution. And it was the same institution that Charles Manson had been incarcerated in the 1950s, right? And that was the exact same time he allegedly had this major turnaround in his life and allegedly learned these mind control techniques such as hypnosis. And that's the same place Henry Lee Lucas happened to be incarcerated in the 50s. So it looks like this is something that is not outside the norm and is very long standing in terms of right carving out these criminal assets to help one stage these very as far as the psychological operation standpoint of kind of cultural terrorism in a way, right? That's what it seems like at the end of the day, as far as the end conclusion for the general public. Honestly, I mean, the Manson murders really helped stage the satanic panic, as far as the moral hysteria is what they like to kind of oversimplify it down to those terms. But clearly, we can point to the finders and various cases such as that, Dutroux, another great example, and the Atlanta child murders, Son of Sam. Each and every one of these cases we've discussed, we can point to as perfectly, representing that very concept.
It's
Um,
interesting how you said that with Timothy McVeigh, clear Patsy, um, that they didn't know if he died or not. There's some questions around his death and the autopsy that immediately made me think of, say, Charlie Kirk. There's some weird stuff with his autopsy. Osama bin Laden, right? They dumped
mhm.
him at sea before we got a chance to see him, or even the Jeffrey Epstein. When you
Oh
start
man.
diving into that, we don't even know if he's dead.
No doubt. And it's just man, to me, and I think the Oklahoma City bombing is one of the most just absurd, kind of examples that you can point to, and it's one of the kind of red pill moments for me personally, just in terms of these major mass casualty events, I guess is a better way to put it, but being a legitimate green light go Gladio operation from the get go, right? From day one, from the origin of the operation. And it wasn't I don't believe that, as much as some people do, kind of effectively come to the conclusion that it was uh, really accidentally greenlit, and kind of went off, not quite by design, and kind of they had an initial plan which didn't effectively take place, and therefore they had to essentially, as it went live, they just picked up the pieces as much as they could. I don't know. I can see why people would come to that conclusion, and it's definitely on the table as a potential possibility, I would say. But beyond that, I just it's a little difficult for me,
Well, what
just
do you
as
think the
far as,
objective was of that entire operation?
well, I mean, it was essentially the bill that was passed the legislature, as far as the legislative action that was passed following OKC, was essentially, it was really the pretext. It was the what's it called? It was the bill that became the Patriot Act, right? But I'm trying to remember now what it was called, because it was definitely important, and I do think it was also effectively a way to smear the really kind of what looked to be the rise of the right wing militia movement that at the time, that seemed to be a little bit more grassroots than a manufactured sort of playbook of any kind. So it did seem like, although I will say, Waco and Ruby Ridge, I now very much see this clandestine element to it that I didn't quite necessarily factor in, even when I did the episode to begin with, because they were so early on whenever I started the show. But a lot of this, it was, I think they're also attempting, and this is interesting to me because if you remember the Whitewater scandal that was happening with the Clinton administration, who just took office, and I think this factors in as well. They were clearly, I mean, Janet Reno, the butcher of Waco. I think Waco was very much uh, it was kind of, they were seeing what exactly would happen. It became really, they had Mossad, Russian intelligence were actually actively on the scene at Waco whenever the final day happened, and I believe that it was kind of a learning experience of what exactly will happen if we implement these strategies on a domestic population, a small, domestic population within the context of the U.S. They'd already done this in Guyana, with the People's Temple Agricultural Project. It seemed like it was almost perfectly in parallel in a certain way, as far as just seeing what would happen with a controlled population, right within the domestic confines of the U.S., and also the ideological representation of who they kind of now they misdirected the public in kind of smearing. Who knows how good of a person David Koresh was? Okay, and then don't get me wrong, I'm not necessarily defending him as a person and his moral character, but I will say there was so much propaganda surrounding the Branch Davidians, and it's just it makes a lot of sense, right? That they would want to smear the name of David Koresh as much as possible to one kind of manufacture consent. And as far as many of the, I believe there was so much news coverage on this that it was even I think disrupting the soap opera channels and things like that. So you had like stay-at-home moms were getting and they were enraged because this was such a long-standing a standoff, is what it was described as. But in reality, that entire time they were deploying these effective psychological operational tactics. I mean, we're talking they legitimately cut off the electricity at one point of the Branch Davidians, and that was right after they sent in milk cartons so they would spoil instantly. So you kind of have that strange dynamic playing out where they're obviously the negotiators are acting in bad faith, and then also they released some of the young children and some of the older individuals and some of the old women specifically at one point. And instead of welcoming these people as victims, the feds decided to parade them around after forcing them in shackles and chains and taking the old women and up to the outside of the Branch Davidian complex and having them yell out to the rest of the Branch Davidians to basically tell them to come out. And it was just complete exploitation, and in every way they were abusing these people psychologically, and then playing music on a loudspeaker. But it was all these different sounds that were playing together. One of it was like Buddhist chanting, rabbits being slaughtered. Like, it was very strange. And there was even this FBI document, I believe, that was talking about how they were trying to remotely activate this mind control resonance frequency system that they were hoping that they could utilize to disrupt the neurological patterns of David Koresh within the compound itself. It was so strange how much they were actually kind of flexing their strategic muscle as far as the sophisticated tactics. And in every way, I felt like it became this sort of test run. And so much of the time that seems to happen. And Boston bombing, great example of that. Manufactured crisis, martial law, right? Just they in every way tried to see how they could layer in these dystopian tactics that would then this would become the pretext that it would essentially be effectively preconditioned into the minds of the American public to accept this whenever it comes around the next time, and usually at a much larger scale, you
You know,
know?
it's interesting. You mentioned, the noise frequency, the loud music, the milk cartons. You kind of see that play out now with our modern interrogation tactics, right? And how
Absolutely.
they're basically, feeding what we do today back then. You think they were testing all these out and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, there's no doubt in my mind, and that's why I believe that, and it's very interesting too, because I think there's so much more that I think will never potentially even be told in terms of or exposed basically to the public. Just as far as how much they were able to achieve in regard to as far as just Waco itself. I think you have so much more mind control playing into this, just as far as the local institution that was being relied upon for some of the Branch Davidians to go to. It reminded me exactly of the People's Temple in Ukiah in California, where I mean, Jim Jones, he controlled that local area. He basically had people infiltrate the um the financial institution that was signing all the welfare checks right out to the individual citizens in the local area. I mean, he had legitimately infiltrated, government organizations in Ukiah. I think by design, obviously, if you know about his connection to Kamala's free ride into politics, right? Her first husband there, as far as yeah, it's very interesting, and we're talking the governor of California, and he has so many different connections where he's being lauded at these public kind of events, where that they host just for Jim Jones before he had this public fallout in terms of his reputation, and um, and so it makes sense because he was sending many of the individuals of the People's Temple to a local institution where they were being essentially programmed and experimented on with these behavioral modification, essentially these tactics, and so it seems like the very same thing happened at Waco, which again, if you're considering what I discovered as far as this individual who allegedly was he was a covert operative that was running domestic gladio operations in the U.S. on behalf of the CIA, and he even claimed that he was the pilot who flew uh, um, George Bush Sr. to London to essentially negotiate the hostage crisis, which was clearly a manufactured crisis in terms of allegedly getting George Bush or was it Reagan elected? I'm trying to remember now. I think it was basically to screw over Carter, essentially, is was the goal. And so this was a political shift because this was the October surprise, and this was allegedly the pilot, Gunter. What was his name? Gunter Russbacher, I believe was his name. And it's fascinating because I believe even Janet Reno, when she was attempting to get reelected, she had kind of spoken out and claimed that she would blow the lid off of what really happened at Waco if she had any sort of issue being reelected. And I found that to be very eye-opening as far as how these usual suspects operate and leverage their knowledge of these covert operations to their benefit as far as their political avenues of power and so yeah, it's Paul Wiltshire is the individual. It's called the Wiltshire Report, and I discovered this whenever I was going to. I think I was doing another Waco episode with Jose at one point, and I basically just went back through and I discovered a strange mind control component to potentially MK Ultra being directly connected into Waco. And so it looks like there is Waco has been a center, allegedly, according to Paul Wiltshire, right, who claims that David Koresh had an extensive CIA background. He was known in CIA circles as a sleeper, someone who had been subjected to extensive CIA mind control training and programming. And Paul Wiltshire, in the Wiltshire Report, he sent all of this to Janet Reno, who was the Attorney General at the time. And of course, he got no real response and then was given the Danny Castellero treatment. Worst case of suicide you've ever seen. Like legitimately, he was killed elsewhere and his body was moved to his private apartment and placed on the toilet. That
Not
I mean,
sup-
it's a fact. And
not
they
suspicious at all.
not suspicious at all. It's just so crazy to me how this happens so very often. But yeah, he basically indicated that Reno, Paul Wiltshire did, knew who had committed the murders, who ordered them, and who had been part of the chain of command, essentially. And basically, as I had mentioned, there was a lot of different mind control activity, according to Paul Wiltshire, that was occurring at the CIA's Leadership Management Institute in Waco. That was the institute where this was effectively taking place. He pointed out that similar CIA sponsored cults are located across the country, including in such places as Salt Lake City, Utah, Provo, Utah, Logan, Utah, Boise, Idaho, and San Francisco, California, which all directly reinforce those very networks that I kind of was describing earlier, especially San Francisco. But if you consider what you had mentioned with Charlie Kirk, I mean the Utah connection is it stands tall. Let's just say, and especially whenever you kind of realize that that is effectively the geographical hub of where the process church ended up in its modern form. as the Best Friends Society animal what is it? It's basically um an animal care organization essentially, right? But yeah, it's located and headquartered there in Utah, and it allegedly the same leadership that were attached to the Process Church are effectively still in place there with the Best Friends Society animal shelter. So makes sense, right? Especially considering the animal sacrifice.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
have a question for you. Now
Mhm.
you've studied MK Ultra a lot, and it seems like that's what they're doing to all these patsies. And I once listened to a podcast of a lady who claimed that she was raised in a sex cult, right? Satanic
Mhm.
sex cult. And she was, MK Ultra or programmed to be a, more or less a sex kitten or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And what she found out as she was deprogramming her, when they were creating these Manchurian candidates with different personalities, what she claimed is they were actually attaching demonic entities to her.
Buddy.
So when they would say a trigger word, it wasn't necessarily a different personality, it was a demonic entity taking over. Do you find any credit to that?
Absolutely. Yes, I do. And this came to me whenever I was researching Project Monarch, right? And I basically discovered there is a very detailed, in-depth article written by an individual by the name of Ron Patton, and he wrote this years ago. And he essentially begins by describing the Jesuit order, these ancient, essentially these ancient schools of knowledge, right? And basically being attached to this hidden knowledge of really Babylon, ancient Babylon, at a certain extent, is what he was referencing. And then how this kind of um, was compiled into even the Egyptian Book of the Dead at one point, that there are so many different layers and references of occultism that is allegedly involved in some of these hidden meanings, and a compilation of rituals as well. And so it describes these. It seems like these deliberate methods of torture that we've seen so very often, utilizing trauma, intimidation, the use of potions back then, which obviously is just chemical warfare and a chemical recipe, which we were just describing is what they rely upon to this very day, as far as this Manchurian candidate program. And I even read about the modern program called Manchurian Candidate ID Program Free. And this allegedly was conducted. This is according to Dr. Robert Duncan, right? Who's he was a Harvard graduate, right? He's a very interesting guy, and I heard him in 2012 give an interview about this in regard to James Holmes, right? Which I thought was very interesting, just as far as he's clearly the Dark Knight cinema shooter from Aurora, Colorado. And it was always crazy to me though, because when I found this, and I'll get back to your demonic entity
Mhm.
question because I do think this perfectly applies, but the we had mentioned the kind of radio frequency, electromagnetic frequency systems that they utilize for keeping you, I believe, in dissociative state, and they can essentially, while you are sleeping, unbeknownst to you, program you with subliminals while they maintain this dissociative state that where you will be um, what's the term, um, suggestible, overwhelmingly suggestible, right? And but Dr. Robert Duncan, that I mentioned, Harvard graduate, investigator, and author of the book Project Soul Catcher: Cyber or Secrets of Cyber and Cybernetic Warfare Revealed. And I've mentioned this a few times because it's one of the most fascinating things that I've ever discovered in terms of a legitimate window that seems credible into modern Manchurian candidate sort of systematic programs that are still, let's that are still active and obviously being very well exploited and leveraged, as far as I'm considering many of these mass shooting events that take place. You just consistently see this applies to them in some sort of way, whether it's um I mean, what's his name from Minneapolis, what the Minneapolis mass shooter, uh i'm his name's escaping, Robin Westman, whatever you want to call him. And then you have right, this even Omar Mateen I love to use as an example, just as far as the Pulse nightclub shooting is concerned. But what Robert Duncan claims is that basically, and this was in 2012, he made the statement that he had personally interviewed in the past 10 years more than 650 people who claimed to have been under government mind control. Many of them said they were in the Manchurian Candidate ID program free. He went to the Senate Intelligence Committee, met with 26 senators. He then met with the head of the LA FBI, and then he goes on to work with a consortium of scientists on a research project for over 8 years, where he provides an estimate. And this estimate was there are about 10,000 Manchurian candidates in the works being programmed by the CIA right now that can be used at any time around the world. But he also claims that only a small percentage actually become successful Manchurians. This the motive is allegedly, according to him, the CIA wants to utilize these individuals to subvert certain international laws forbidding the agency to engage in the assassination of foreign leaders through strategy of indirection, or utilizing agency handlers to indoctrinate individuals into these Manchurian candidate programs to self-righteously assert plausible deniability after the fact. So that makes sense. And Dr. Robert Duncan says a lot of these alleged mass shooters, such as James Holmes, fall into this category directly. And he suggested the ultimate priority, and this is something that I covered at the beginning of my Columbine episode. I discussed Behold the Pale Horse and Bill Cooper basically explaining Project Orion and explaining also this very interesting kind of justification of how you could encourage and manufacture consent to facilitate landmark gun legislation to effectively disarm. It would basically create an environment where the American public would effectively disarm themselves, right? And this is one of the key priorities in terms of these mass casualty events and also these school shootings specifically, because I think it's emotion arousing violence, which is exactly what Paul Villeli and Michael Aquino wrote about in
A known
Mind War.
Satanist and head of
Yeah,
the
exactly.
psychological division within the U.S. Army.
Exactly. Temple of Set. I mean, founder, which is just crazy, and member of the Star Chamber, an exclusive leadership, apparently a hierarchy in regard to the what is it, the White Eagle Underground and the Brotherhood of the White Temple, which is fascinating because I believe there's a direct connection into that, and we can discuss that. And I really wanted to at one point because we're talking about Nazi breeding experiments, alive and well. Yes,
Let's
and
do it.
and
Let's get into
awesome.
that. But let me point out one thing real quick. Was interesting. You brought up that Minneapolis shooter, Robin, or whatever his name is, her, whatever.
Hmm.
Did you see that picture that he drew of himself while he was staring
Yes.
into the mirror, having a conversation with this entity that looked like ball?
Yes, it looked like straight up like ball, like this demonic occult entity, and it was fascinating. I remember when I first saw it, as well as his direct connection to Robert Cremo, who was the Parkland shooter, who
He had a
just
direct
up and
connection to that.
yeah. So basically, that came through. Oh, and by the way, his grandpa, it was a Kentucky senator, a legislator who actively, from the beginning of the early 2000s, has been, or at least was actively pursuing the implementation. He's a conservative Republican in Kentucky who's pursuing landmark transgender rights legislation,
Mm.
which makes no sense. But this is his grandfather, right? Which we already know that his father seemed to be a spook of some kind who worked for an intelligence cutout, right? Which is very strange as well. But I'm not at all surprised. But he used the same exact symbols on his arsenal as Robert Cremo did. And Robert Cremo's just up and vanished, allegedly. No one knows where he is, which is fascinating, and kind of relates to that of Lance Twiggs, right? The furry fetish roommate of Tyler Robinson,
Yeah.
who yeah, which by the way, there's a furry fetish connection to Thomas Crooks. I just found out, because if you didn't realize, Tucker Carlson got a huge uh, uh, what is it? he got a huge tip by some sort of underground source that we can't know of, that's anonymous, right? And he would like to let us know that there was a long-standing digital footprint that Thomas Crooks has that was never effectively revealed to the public. That is all true. But at the same time, it's right, it's how are they representing this subject, and what is the true kind of result of their approach in their presentation. And I think that is usually where they miss the boat by design. And the Tuckers of the world, just like the Candace Owens of the world,
Wait,
are
you're not going to vote for Tucker in 2028?
man, the people who are legitimately suggesting that, or even worse, I'm seeing the JD Vance the name being floated around, which is I just can't understand how you could still be engaging in sort of just the political environment by viewing the power paradigm at this sort of face value interpretation, and that alone is very yeah, it's let's just say frustrating at a certain level, but also I did think before I finish that point on the potential demonic possession in terms of mind control, and then what else did what did I bring
Then
up
we'll get
just a
into
moment?
Nazi breeding programs that you wanted to talk
Yes,
about.
yes, definitely, because I had I find it very interesting as well that Bill Cooper had brought up the fact that basically he was acting like essentially during his reaction to Columbine. I was basically watching his video when he first was reacting in real time. The news just surfaced, and he was in tears by the end of it, right? Like it didn't really take long for him to become overwhelmingly emotional. And who knows how I see so many people. I understand questioning the integrity and the credibility of people like a Ted Gunderson and things of that nature. But I do think that it feels like maybe Bill Cooper just got a few things wrong. Maybe he was utilized in terms of being given a false information for that very purpose to have him become a limited hangout against his own sort of. It was. I think that happens occasionally, and it definitely has happened in the past. I think
Well, he
more.
admitted to it, right?
Yeah, definitely. What I think that was the alien component, right? Wasn't it that he had
Yeah.
admitted to? Yeah, which makes a lot of sense. And even in terms of Bob Lazar, as much as I think that was a major psyop, yeah, they could have just dragged him into some room and claimed that this was an extraterrestrial corpse that they were tinkering on, and he actually bought it all, hook, line, and sinker. And why not? When you're effectively conditioned to that level, you kind of it's hard to probably completely unplug yourself from that way of life and that kind of psychological construct of what society is to you. In a way is almost yeah, it's a false construct in itself. But yeah, I did think that he was acting in good faith and he had good intentions, at least with Bill Cooper, but you never really know. So you'll have to discern for yourself. But when I was listening to the reaction, he brought up the rites of Ishtar, Molech, human sacrifice in the springtime. And he said the ancient teachings of the mystery schools all factor into the timing of these events. And that the reason why in the springtime they would prefer to sacrifice or prioritize the sacrifice of children, it's specifically due to this ancient, occult ritual of the right, at least factoring in the layered agenda of the rites of Ishtar and Molech, and this sort of sacrificial nature of youth in general, right? Being sacrificed to the god and the ideology itself, and holding significant power to that of the occult initiate who is among, right, the let's just say among the initiated in terms of the agenda playing out. And so but yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me, and I felt like that fit perfect as far as the agenda that I've seen so often and the timing of these events. And yeah, with Bill Cooper, I always found it interesting when he was actually discussing Project Orion, because I did think it fit very well in terms of the school shootings, and the way that he described it in Behold a Pale Horse. was that he said for many years the secret government has been encouraging the manufacture and importation of military grade firearms for criminal use. This is intended to foster a feeling of insecurity, which would lead the American people to voluntarily disarm themselves by passing laws against firearms. Then he goes on to explain by using drugs and hypnosis on mental patients in a process called Orion, the CIA inculcated the desire in these people to open fire on schoolyards and thus inflame the anti gun lobby. And I felt like there is no better way to kind of stage the introduction into the Columbine shooting, right? Because it did effectively play out you know, as far as these measures, these security measures following Columbine implemented in all these high schools nationwide, clear backpacks, you know, what is it, the electrical screeners that they put in the schools as well, you know, and just like that of let's say the TSA or something, or even off the back of the Vegas shooting, right? The Michael Chertoff and the Chertoff group trying to exploit and benefit off of high security being demanded for the casinos. And it makes sense, right? As far as a layered agenda, and you have to benefit at every turn, at every sort of every time you turn a corner in these clandestine operations, they're benefiting. The permanent establishment is benefiting at the end of the day, and that is my biggest concern. You have, you know, I think it was the just the notion of the federal involvement from the moment that the event went live at Columbine. I mean, you have a FEMA comms van, a communications van that's there on the ground right away that is facilitating all the on the ground communications between law enforcement, and that's fascinating, as well as the military kind of personnel that were on site. You know, you had an actual lieutenant colonel who's running the on the ground operations as well. It doesn't seem to be, you know, this sort of status quo, normal response of any kind. But we can get into Columbine later.
But
I'm
what's interesting
obviously.
too, you notice how these weird people show up. I mean, you mentioned Las Vegas shooting. You have that one police officer that was there for Las Vegas and for the
Mhm.
Hawaiian fires,
Oh my
covering
God,
everything
wasn't
up.
that crazy? Exactly. And you know what that reminded me of is the sheriff in Vegas. Whenever he was giving the public just they had this press conference, and he's he's basically providing the rundown publicly, and giving all, at least providing the minimal details that they would allow the public to be aware of at the time. And I remember he started discussing the multiple cars that Stephen Paddock owned. And it was getting very strange just right off of the bat, you know, and instantly he had someone in a suit standing right behind him lean up and say, "Don't go there." And then he changes the course of the conversation entirely. It was fascinating to watch. But that is a great example of how they control the narrative. And you know, so I think it's very important to always, you know, find those moments and spotlight them for a brief, just briefly to kind of drive home the reality of this formidable threat we're facing, as far as you know, just well, really operationally controlling what the public is even aware of, you know. And that in itself is fascinating to me, because you have to be very well committed to these cases to ever really come across those damning details that provide the credibility necessary to poke the holes, the major holes in the official narrative. And with yeah, let's get into the Nazi breeding experiments.
And
Just
one question, one thing real quick. I just
Mhm.
assume it's all, you know, intelligence operation, and then I rely on guys like you who actually take the time and do these deep dives. So if you want real deep dives and you're listening to this, you do so many great series, like really digging into these, like hour, 2, 3 hour series, digging into all these high impact events. So if you're into this kind of stuff and you want to get the details, so then you go see, and tell all your friends about it. Austin is the man you want to watch.
Man, thank you so much, buddy. I Yeah, I definitely didn't expect to do 4 hours and 10 minutes on Columbine, but by the end of it, my God, I mean, just realizing that there were these tangible connections to let's just say modern mass shooting events like the Sikh temple shooting in Wisconsin and Wade Michael Page being a legitimate Gladio operative who was trained at Fort Bragg as a psychological warfare specialist, right? Psychological operations specialist is what he was. And it's fascinating to see that he's given a general discharge in 98, right, at Fort Bragg, and allegedly, the story goes that it was due to him abusing alcohol while on post and on duty at Fort Bragg. And so then he receives a general discharge and goes directly to Littleton, Colorado, 4 miles from Columbine, 4 miles from the Blackjack Pizza restaurant, and 6 miles from Eric Harris's house. And he had a direct affiliation to the Trenchcoat Mafia. And it turns out that he's also an individual who's a member of the Western Hammerskins, which is an Aryan white supremacist organization that is very much concerned about racial purification. And so it looks as if, by the way, this element plays into the mind control aspect of this unique brand of programming that seems to effectively implement these sort of strange Aryan philosophies that incorporate this kind of allegiance to even Adolf Hitler, because you had members of the Star Chamber and the White Eagle Underground, which very much play a prominent role in that of the network attached to Littleton, because they have a Sedalia, Colorado headquarters, right, for this group. And this headquarters is, I mean, essentially one, they're running behavioral modification experimentation on young assets within the context of what was described by investigators as a cult. And so this is local investigators are discovering this. And that's what blew me away, is that this was from an internal document, a case document that was made by an investigator who had just stumbled upon basically a child abuse case that was brought to his attention by the mother of the child who had been sadistically abused, and her name was Belinda Schultz. And it's a very disgusting and sad story. But I should mention though that the demonic possession aspect before we get into the Nazi breeding experiment,
Yes.
because I want to actually answer your question. And it's amazing to me because you see so many different sub projects. What, 149 sub projects were under the umbrella of Project MK Ultra. So, that was the thing that blew me away whenever I was reading through the artichoke documents. Honestly, like whenever I found out that it was in the early 50s, that they had an artichoke document from 1953, right? It's called Outline of Special H Cases. Uh, and when you start to read it, you realize H is clearly referring to hypnosis.
Okay.
And so they say in all of these cases, these subjects, this is January 7th, 1953, an internal document from the Artichoke files. And it says in all of these cases, these subjects have clearly demonstrated that they can pass from a fully awake state to a deep H controlled state via the telephone, via some very subtle signal that cannot be detected by other persons in the room, and without the individual being able to note the change. It has been shown clearly that physically individuals can be induced into H by telephone, by receiving written matter, or by the use of code, signals, or word, and that control of those hypnotized can be passed from the individual to another without great difficulty. Instantly, I think Sirhan, the woman in the polka dot dress, leaning up to him, touching him on his neck, whispering something in his ear, and then having the appropriate scent that he had been conditioned in his dissociative state to essentially trigger to in his layered programming. So they're overwhelming your sensory input by effectively triggering you in that moment. It's fascinating to realize how much they're are essentially disrupting, your subconscious mind and kind of your neurological avenues, right? Pathways, let's say. And and so I thought of that. And I also thought of the movie, right? The film The Manchurian Candidate from 1963. And because I remember when William Ramsey came on, and we discussed that
He's
not
a
too
great
long ago.
guest. Yeah.
Man, he's the best. I love William. And he's so just a wealth of knowledge, right? And my God, I learned so much from his show over the course of the years, but yeah, it was fascinating just rewatching that with kind of accumulated knowledge on the subject, and then seeing when at one there's sort of an Oedipus complex that plays into the main character, right? Who it's very interesting, kind of how that seems to be a fundamental factor in so many of these networks of abuse, where I mean, even in the Dutroux network with Regina Louf, who was the X1 victim in the X dossiers, her grandmother ran a brothel in Nazi Germany before ever going to Belgium after the war and setting up another brothel in the Gladio network of strategy of tension playing out, utilizing those paramilitary groups in Belgium, right? Utilizing all of those, even the gendarmes who were entirely corrupt at the time, and these officers who were helping abduct the children on behalf of the network with Dutroux. They had police protection. I mean, that's a fact. And to see all the dead bodies just accumulate in regard to throughout the course of the case and the trial itself leading up to the trial. There's like 30 dead bodies that,
Wow.
yeah, and we're talking prosecutors, detectives. I mean,
More
it
dangerous than working for the Clintons.
absolutely. Yeah, the Dutroux network is one of the most, and it's definitely the most sadistic network I've ever read about. I've never come across more details that um, fundamentally kind of fractured me personally. It disrupted me to my core. Let's just say I was not aware of the level of depravity. And it's incomprehensible at a certain point. Obviously, if you have an ethical bone in your body, but once you read through some of this, it will stay with you forever. And there's something that definitely plays into the notion that it seems as if this is long standing as far as how you can trigger an individual who has this long standing layered programming of utilizing these alters in within the context of dissociative identity disorder and multiple personality disorder, because it looks as if when you fracture off the neural pathways in the mind throughout the kind of enduring the abuse in the moment, it's basically a coping mechanism. So deep within the recesses of your subconscious mind, you try to it's fight or flight. And young people who are effectively prepubescent usually is kind of the status quo in regard to the network of abuse. It's apparently even their blood is considered to be far more valuable if they're prepubescent, and especially in the context of an occult ritual or even in a fertility death ritual, which happens very often, I think, as well. But yeah, just as far as what they've been able to do for so long, right? And then we had just mentioned um, kind of just the fascinating concept of what Dr. Robert Duncan was claiming about modern Manchurians. The part that I thought was so fascinating about what he had mentioned was the technological achievement of what they were potentially able to do throughout the process. And that was basically they had, through this modern day technology, he doesn't believe that it requires brain implants, is what he claims, right? And so he says that they do work well, but they seem to rely far more often on post hypnotic suggestion. And so one of their goals was to create split personality spies so they could pass information without even knowing it, and even commit murder with no memory of the crime so they could still pass a polygraph test. So that's another reason why Sirhan, all he could remember was coffee, coffee, coffee. Like they put him back into a hypnotic trance while he was at trial. And I'm talking the prosecution and the defense had expert hypnotists who put Sirhan back into a hypnotic trance and tried to have him walk them back through the event. That in itself was fascinating to watch, especially in through the lens of the prosecution, because they were acting in total bad faith, obviously. And in every way, they're leading the witness while he's under hypnosis, right? They're like, Sirhan, the gun's in your hand now, Sirhan. Like it was so bad. And I just couldn't even imagine. I felt so bad for him, honestly. Just seeing he was convulsing by the end of it. They're trying to remind him, why did you want to kill Senator Kennedy? And they whenever they were leading him into feeling as if the gun was in his hands, remember he had already claimed on the record that he didn't remember any of it, and he thought he was at the shooting range and saw targets in his eyes. So that sounds like he had been taken many times to a shooting range under some sort of hypnotic trance, and been attempting to reinforce his programming and his actions while he was programmed. And also writing in his diary, RFK must die, RFK must be killed, RFK must be killed. It was just so weird. It seemed like it was effectively reinforcing every layer of those, programmed kind of agenda items that were implemented into, at least throughout the process of his strange experimentation that he endured. But
Correct me if
yeah,
I'm
man.
wrong. Wasn't he tied to the bushes somehow?
Oh, so it's fascinating because he was actually at. So I mentioned the Manchurian Candidate. It's very strange because the author, right, of the Manchurian Candidate was actually at uh, um, uh, a dinner party with Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate and Robert Kennedy the night before he was assassinated. Talk about the Last Supper,
Right?
right? I mean, holy shit. So it makes a lot of sense, but he definitely, as far as the Bush connection, there's a very strange connection to him basically being in a feature Time magazine article years before any of this when he was very young. And the person that he's in, it's a skate issue, right? Where they're like talking about skating culture, it's very strange, but he's in the picture with what looks to be the exact same individual who was the busboy in the pantry of the Ambassador Hotel that very same night, who was the first person pictured over the dying corpse of Robert Kennedy. And it's just insane that years prior to this, he personally was with Sirhan in a Time magazine cover, which, by the way, Time magazine was ran by Henry Luce at the time, who was a member of the Pilgrim Society in the Anglo-American establishment, who ran Project Mockingbird. So if we're talking, you're controlling every aspect of the mainstream media, and then you also have these strategic assets that you can rely upon throughout the course of their lives, and essentially, put them into their proper position in the moment that you would like to greenlight their usefulness for the cause. Then let's just say Sirhan was more than likely kind of a generational asset of this very sort of network that I think have a a well entrenched uh yes, breeding program. But I would like to just mention the fact that how often I've seen this. I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was potentially a consequential result of a Nazi breeding experiment where his father was even potentially a colonel in the SS who took over power in Nazi Germany following Hitler, right, for a brief period of time. And I'll pull up a picture and I'll bring it up on the screen. Hopefully, if I can, I'll share my screen and show you the picture because discern for yourself. There's quite a
Yeah.
likeness. I will say that. And I'll also say that Kerry Thornley is the one who makes all of these claims, who uh, ultimately created the New Age occult organization known as Discordianism, which seems to be an accelerationist philosophy of some kind that plays
Yeah.
perfectly into that of the modern Gladio playbook. And
Yeah.
so it makes a lot of sense knowing that we have the Michael Aquinos of the world who structure these occult organizations on behalf of that very network. And it's another example of plausible deniability, but it's more than that, it feels like. And he was a key figure in the incorporation of the Process Church there in Louisiana, right? and was also working at a Guy Bannister's office at 544 Camp Street with Lee Harvey Oswald leading up to the JFK assassination in Dallas, when Lee Harvey Oswald is going around town into strategic areas where he would be obviously noticed, and there would be evidence of him being there, because he would go down and he would basically place flyers and get into trouble by basically, there was this strange debate that happened as well that was televised between him and what looked to be an Cuba, anti-Castro personality, a political personality at the time. The whole thing felt arranged. It felt like a manufactured media stunt to essentially, one, reinforce who this man would be in our minds, obviously, because it looked as if he was a communist, like he was a sympathizer and he was pro Castro, which is completely the opposite of what his philosophy was politically. And it was interesting because he was the one passing around these pamphlets for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee down near all of the government buildings in Louisiana. And I remember Guy Bannister got so upset about this because they had 544 Camp Street, the address, on the pamphlets that he was passing out, which connected him directly to the naval intelligence operation they were running in that area. But yes, which is insane. And so it looks like that was a kind of a mess up, a flub within the context of them staging the what, unbeknownst to Lee Harvey Oswald, would effectively be his hung out to dry course of operational course, which seemed like laying the breadcrumbs for his potential crucifixion right later on. And so it makes a lot of sense that Kerry Thornley would have been one of the impersonators of Oswald at that time, who was Jim Garrison, as he was investigating the JFK assassination. He named Kerry Thornley as being one of the key impersonators of Lee Harvey Oswald leading up to the assassination. And basically, because there were Oswalds everywhere. One was in Mexico City going to the Russian embassy. It didn't even make sense. And it seems as if they had these sort of what's it called when you have a doppelganger. They had these Oswald doppelgangers that they had very much been, I believe, engineering this kind of hangout in terms of the intelligence manipulation of this event itself. And so it would be strategic to have this individual who looks like Oswald, obviously be witnessed at all of these strange areas that would help reinforce the official narrative. But
It's crazy how layered these things are.
oh man, I'm telling you right now, it blows me away what exactly the level of detail they have to go through in order to stage such effective campaigns of ideological subversion. But it's perfect in terms of their execution. And that's what I think I kind of reject the clown pill as far as the not the interpretation of our sort of current environment and making light of it just so we aren't as demoralized. I think that's a beautiful use of the clown pill. The way I'm referring it or referring to it as is really just not the traditional definition. It's kind of my new interpretation of people I see really kind of oversimplifying the power paradigm in terms of the individual prominent political personalities, and them viewing them and also crucifying them with all of the agenda items that are being achieved. And I think that's a huge mistake, because obviously they're really more the face of public perception in regard to the legislative action than they are actually in direct support and sponsoring or even manufacturing any of these policies. I don't believe they have that much direct power,
No.
and so I do find myself frustrated as far as seeing people view this current environment and see these prominent political personalities like a Trump or an AOC or whoever you want to point to, who clearly are at face value kind of laughable, as far as just, I mean, come on, even the hilarious aspects of Trump that I appreciate, like just kind of speaking out of
It's
turn. And
ridiculous.
oh, it's ridiculous. And I will say, how is that not just, how are we not vindicated every single time that we witness a Mamdani go up to the White House, and what were we saying when everyone on the left is taking some sort of victory lap, like they had at some level their side of the political spectrum won the day. It's just pendulum swing for the purposes of keeping you within this corralled, constructed, you know, acceptable establishment line that I believe is really the ultimate goal,
No,
right?
I agree with you. I joke, the system doesn't care who you put your faith in as long as it's in the system. The greatest thing they fear is you realizing that it's all BS and that you should look for your guidance and, your peace elsewhere. That's the biggest fear
Absolutely.
of them to me.
Absolutely, buddy. I think it's kind of crazy to me because here, let me pull up that picture actually of Lee Harvey Oswald because my God, talk about it's just fascinating to me how much you this legitimately feels like it is a real possibility, right?
That's him.
Yeah,
Uh,
that it's his father.
well, you see that
And
now with guys who are in psyops. Like 5 years previously, I forget which one it was. He showed up in a BlackRock commercial,
absolutely.
and you're
Yeah.
like,
I'm telling you that was Thomas Crooks, by the way, who has
yeah.
that digital footprint now and allegedly has a furry fetish, or at the very least, when you read into it and look at what fetish he potentially had, it was more like he was maybe interested in trannies at a certain level because of the weird art that he was kind of appreciating on these strange sites. But yeah, it's definitely cause for concern because I all that I saw were red flags in terms of the background that Thomas Crooks shares with that of the usual suspects recently in
Well,
this trans furry fetish.
they want you blaming an unhinged tranny furry lover instead of
Right.
who it really is, which is intelligence.
Exactly. That is the goal. And that's why I think that the vast majority of what we see is really damage control as far as the kind of the influencer industrial complex hoping to prioritize any of these subjects. It's usually to lead you into a misdirected and false conclusion, I think, for the vast majority of these cases. But do you mind if I run to the bathroom? I have to
Yeah,
piss
go
real
ahead.
quick. All
Yeah,
right, I'll
yeah.
be right back, and then I'll show you the picture of Lee Harvey Oswald. Then we'll get into Nazi
The
breeding
breeding.
experiments,
Yeah.
and someday I might be able to tell you about the potential demonic possession being a part of monarch mind control. I'll be right back, buddy.
Go.
Right, buddy.
All right.
Oh my gosh, man. I
Nazi
know.
genetic. I really want to hear about this. Does this have to do with the Ubermensch?
Man, it's at well, I definitely think that the Ubermensch, as far as finding, it's almost the Nazis' version of the peak soldier performance program in a way, DARPA's peak soldier
Gotcha.
performance program,
Where do you
which
think they
is
got it from?
yeah, exactly, and that's a hilarious point to make. Honest, well, not hilarious at all, but But just as far as the Nazi eugenics programs being, I thought it was always really just kind of it's definitely hypocritical, at least at a certain level, but at the same time, it's it couldn't be more accurate in terms of the defense that members of the SS and the Nazi leadership attempted to justify, right, as far as their excuse for some of these more sinister programs that they were implementing of eugenics and transhumanism. It looks like the vast majority of their defense was that they. What do you mean? We were just basically copying the United States eugenics program. That's all that we were doing, which is hilarious. That was the they said they were running their eugenics program based off of the U.S. model. And so, in every way, I just think that one, that's perfectly accurate if you research the history of
Okay.
eugenics in the U.S., right? And especially, I mean, the Puerto Rican young women were effectively just destroyed. An entire generation of Puerto Rican women were basically prioritized and targeted in terms of even many of them becoming losing their fertility. Right? It's just disgusting what the examples of kind of the legitimate, you know, what these individual perpetrators will kind of utilize in terms of the justification of the pursuit of science, when in reality you can see exactly what it really is. And that's kind of just at face value the immoral, underlying context that so many of us unfortunately aren't aware of, right? But I will say, as far as just Nazi breeding experiments are concerned, I guess the first thing that should be said is that uh, Harry Thornley also wrote a book called The Idle Warriors, and the book came out in 1963, which is fascinating because the book actually it 100% had to do with the exact same story of Lee Harvey Oswald, a defected Marine who essentially defects from the military, joins the Soviet Union, and becomes trained in this sort of priority assassination, and then comes back to the U.S. and commits an assassination on the U.S. president. And so it's like this Soviet plot, to
Take out the president.
commit an assassination on a U.S. president, and that alone is literally published just before the JFK assassination takes place. And Kerry Thornley happened to have been stationed with Lee Harvey Oswald at the Atsugi Air Force Base in Japan, where they, by the way, were actively pursuing behavioral modification research experimentation at Atsugi at the time. And also at Atsugi was the fake defector program that was being implemented by the CIA at that very moment. And so what did they do? They sent Lee Harvey Oswald, after training him up at the Monterey Language Institute in California and teaching him how to speak fluent Russian as if he were inherently from the area. Basically, is what they claimed, that he spoke such fluent Russian, it was as if he were potentially programmed to speak Russian, right? You never know, but it certainly looks as if that's a possibility. And so we're talking the CIA conducting extensive LSD research at Atsugi as well. And
Well,
it
demons speak all languages. I'm just saying.
absolutely, no doubt. And Thornley, he was a radar operator in the units with Oswald at even at Santa Ana, right? Which is just fascinating that they were directly, tied at the hip in this way. But yeah, so he wrote The Idle Warriors while they were stationed together about this insubordinate, individual who basically defects to the Soviet Union. And Thornley described it as he wrote the novel as a way of exploring Oswald's possible reasons for doing the same by projecting his personality into Oswald's. He writes this before Oswald commits the assassination,
And he
allegedly.
was staying in the same army, whatever base over
Yes.
in Japan.
Oh, yes. And also in California and Santa Ana, right? At El Toro, at the base in El Toro. And so, and then also, he wrote a nonfiction piece on Oswald called Oswald after the assassination, which is very strange. But it basically fully reinforced the lone nut assassin angle, and yeah, it's very much just kind of peddling the very same narrative that came from that of the Warren Commission report, which, if I mean, Frank Church was clearly, I believe the Church Committee hearings. Once you realize all the false transparency, that we've basically, it's the same as the Epstein files, right? In terms of this false disclosure and obviously controlled transparency, and in every way, it's actually just it's perfect cannon fodder for the moment of heightening tensions within the context of the culture war and reinforcing these terrible ideas in the minds of the public. And I see with what happened in terms of the Warren Commission and especially the Church Committee hearings, it's impossible to not claim that allegedly Frank Church was sexually blackmailed by a human honeypot that was a child prostitute out of an early 50s program, trauma-based mind control, basically Alan Dulles, a brainchild that they wanted to utilize this human honeypot, utilizing child prostitutes to sexually blackmail political assets. And so Frank Church was not immune to this as a legitimate strategy. And so apparently this was even as far as something that they grappled with the ethical kind of outcome of the philosophy behind these inhumane pedophile sort of as far as the pedophile foundation behind this kind of project in general. I mean, talk about a sinister sub project, right? And this is what allegedly was the case. It was between 55 and 57 when Sidney Gottlieb and you had John Gittinger, who was a CIA psychologist. You had various other perpetrators who were among this Alan Dulles kind of elite exclusive network at the time, and they were utilizing Tulane University as a site for much of the experimentation, where they even had an institution, a medical institution, who was providing wards of beds for I think it was East Louisiana State Hospital, actually, because if I remember right, that's where Lee Harvey Oswald tried to go get a job leading up to the assassination in Dallas, and it was directly linked to the Tulane experiments and these mind control experiments as well. So talk about getting a mind control job leading up to your patsy, path of the patsy. It makes a lot of sense. But so it looks like they had a moral dilemma, right? Because essentially what they wanted was to use child prostitutes as human honeypots. And this is apparently the same period of time where you have, because we're talking sexual entrapment operations that they're first experimenting on as far as what we have a legitimate window into for their documents. And so this is when the first sexual blackmail experiments using children was effectively documented on the record. And so this is the apparently during this sinister sub project where they even utilized Richard Helms as being a part of it, right? Because the implication is that the documentation was conveniently prioritized as a part of the stash that Richard Helms would later destroy in 1972. So that was the exact same time as all of the alleged transparency and the disclosure of MK Ultra, right? It was all through the New York Times. I believe Seymour Hersh ran an article on what was the name of that individual who basically was pushed out of the hotel, which was basically being ran as an experimentation, really just like a location for where they were running some of these clandestine experiments. But allegedly, this individual had leapt to his death, and he was a member of
From
the CIA.
Operation Wormwood?
Yes, that's it. Yeah. So I can't remember the guy's name, but effectively, it was Richard Helms who helped destroy most of the most damning prioritized files that would clearly. You just have to imagine wouldn't you think they would effectively prioritize covering their tracks in terms of operationally speaking, greenlighting some sort of child prostitution operation for sexual blackmail purposes? You would probably try to destroy those files first. That's
Yeah.
kind of the notion here. And so yeah, it looks like you had an individual by the name of Carol Rutz as well, not only Claudia Mullen, and this is usually kind of the case as well, as far as this kind of generational abuse playing into these individual victims, especially the children. And it seems like she had a long history of being sexually abused by her father and her grandfather. And this is Carol Rutz. And she had allegedly developed already an alter personality named Little Girl to endure her torment, very much like Regina Louf, who had an alter called the Whore, and she would just be fully submissive at all times, and it was just, and even would write differently, had different handwriting. It was almost as if, and this is why I think the FBI, as far as if you ever looked through, and the symbols now, but the pedophile kind of
Yeah.
coded language that they've relied upon for years, and this was heavy in Pizzagate as far as the my direct connection to understanding the full set of symbols that they allegedly have utilized for quite some time. I would imagine they've evolved, but at the same time, you have to at least realize that the the sort of squiggly circle, right? One of them that seems as if it's really kind of not the smoothest circle, right? The symbol that they draw, and the purpose was because they want it to look as if a young child had written that symbol, and
Mm.
so that would implicate your sexual proclivity as being little boy lover, and so that was what that symbolized, was little boy lover logo. And so I've seen that so often. It was
You know
even
what's
in the
interesting
first
about
season.
that logo, real quick, is that show True Detective on
Yes,
HBO? It's
yes,
all over that show. And the
exactly.
first episode was before all the Pizzagate stuff coming out started coming out. See, I think that has more ancient roots
Yeah.
that goes on to this.
Neo-paganism too, man. Like as far as like ancient paganism, but also like this neo-paganism in the modern form. I covered that in my I did a two-part episode. Well, it was all in one, but I kind of segued halfway and basically covered two cases. I covered the Hosanna Church scandal, and then I segued to the Delphi murders around halfway. And my God, as far as being the real life inspiration for True Detective, this fits perfectly. And I covered that crime scene from that girl at the beginning of True Detective season one, where she's essentially positioned, her dead body's positioned in a way where she's staged with as if in a prayer position in front of an old tree with antlers tied to her head, and also that symbol, that little boy lover logo
Right
on her
there.
back, right? Which is insane. And I believe there were these what are they called? These kind of Cajun, um, um, it's like this Cajun culture. These sticks that are bundled together, and like it's strange art, but they were positioned all around her and on the tree a little bit as well. But it reminded me so much of the Delphi murders, because if you are aware of the murders of Liberty German and the girl's name, Abby and Libby, but but those two girls died in 2017, I believe, and it was in Delphi, Indiana. And my God, talk about an insane network that was basically helped cover up that gruesome murder, which I believe was a staged occult ritual for a local organization called the Vinlanders. And basically, they were attached to this old ideology of neo-paganism, and they were worshiping these kind of ancient pantheon of gods, and one of which, apparently for the initiates, it required blood sacrifice. And so they chose these girls who I believe were procured through Snapchat, through this Anthony Shots Snapchat profile, who I believe was a low level, avenue of procurement for some of these, networks. criminal networks. And basically, because he had been attached to that very same Snapchat profile, I think his name is Keegan Klein, by the way, the actual perpetrator who was running the Anthony Shots profile. And he was connected to allegedly connected to this unrelated case in a local area as well that had to do with this young girl reporting that apparently she had engaged with this Snapchat profile, let him know where she was, where she lived, type of thing, and then a masked man was spotted right outside her window, basically in what I believe to be an attempted procurement operation. And so it looks like that was just another sort of a window into the modern age avenues of procurement in a sort of way. But what's crazy is that his profile is the one that I believe either Libby or Abby, I forget which one now, was directly corresponding with when they got to the Monon High Bridge Trail, which is where they disappeared. And their bodies weren't found very far from that. And by the way, there's a Freemasonic private cemetery plot that's right next to where those bodies were staged, just so everyone's aware. And allegedly, one of the individuals who was a part of the execution and ritual sacrifice was apparently his son was actually dating one of the girls, right? And so they had this understanding that one of the girl's mothers were in a sexual relationship with a black man, and that this was opposed to their ideological preference. And so they themselves wanted to, that was one of the reasons they prioritized her child as a sacrifice, was because it kind of helped exercise their philosophy in a certain way as well.
I have a question. The
Hmm.
one thing I've noticed, I don't know if you ever thought about this, is there is a association between the occult and these ancient pagan gods.
Yeah.
And when you dive back into our ancient past, what you'll find to realize that all these cultures, they talked about it, right? So if you're a Mayan or Egyptian or Nordic, you would have called these entities that came down here these gods, and we get to pick and choose and worship them. But the ancient Israelites in the Old Testament talk about it the same way, but they'll tell you, no, these were rebellious angels that were actually fighting against God. So do you find it weird that the most powerful, knowledgeable, secretive people in the world are actively worshiping gods who are rebelling against the God of the Bible?
Yes,
Like,
I do. And
that's what it is.
oh yeah, I think you're absolutely right. But I also think,
And I'm not talking about the
unfortunately,
institutions that claim to represent the
right,
Bible or
right.
anything like that. I
You're
don't
right,
trust.
right, right,
If
right.
you're watching
No,
my
no, no.
stuff, it's if you go to the
I'm
book,
fully on.
yeah.
Exactly. And completely agree with you as far as that is concerned. Is the problem is the general public falling into the traps, right? Obviously, and so they inevitably will find themselves worshiping and kind of participating in some of these very same similar rituals that would not at all be aligned with their true perspective and philosophy and spirituality if they actually understood it. But I
Oh
think that
yeah.
the goal is through the
Well, they
subconscious
think it's cool to be a
manipulation.
witch and stuff like that, you know?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, which that alone is it talk about, psychological conditioning, and to me it's not at all surprising that they've kind of navigated this very deceptive path to help cloud the vision of any of us being able to properly define the true representation and of what these entities really promote in my mind, right? And it's very strange though, as far as the neo-pagan connection to that of Delphi, because again, the way they staged Abby and Libby's bodies, one of the girls were completely nude. They had taken their clothes off after they committed the murder, and then the other girl, they had swapped clothes. So they had taken the clothes off one of the girls and put it on the other girl's body, and then the way they staged the bodies was in prayer positions at the base of this tree. And it looked exactly as the portrait of Odin hanging from World Tree. Yes. And
That is
so this
so
is
wild.
it's wild. And then you look into the individuals who were affiliated with the network, the exact same, the Patsy, who I believe had nothing to do and is actually an innocent victim in this tragedy, is Richard Allen, who has now been given the ultimate sentence of, I believe, over 140 years in prison. right, and I believe he's innocent. And I even watched the footage of his alleged confession when they catch him in the moment. Man, talk about realizing you got entirely just strung up. Like he was acting in good faith, and then he realized what they were doing to him. And it's the saddest thing to ever witness. I mean, talk about crucifying an innocent man with crimes he did not commit. But I will say what happened, his entire legal defense when they come to, so none of the Odinism defense, because their entire defense rested on them being able to present all of these connections between the local chapter of the Vinlanders, how they're connected to the prison industrial complex, and how the members of the apparently all the prison guards at the major penitentiaries there in Indiana were allegedly all holding dual loyalty to the Odinist group and had patches reflecting their loyalty to that very Odinist organization while they were actively acting as prison guards and apparently abusing Richard Allen while he was incarcerated. And
You know,
they
if you
were
ever want to have
present.
a
Go
if
ahead.
you ever want to have a little bit of fun, I'm actually going on Nephilim Death Squad to talk about this. Go look at all these logos of intelligence agencies. Go look at these ancient family crests, and you will see the symbology that goes all the way back to these fallen gods.
Absolutely. And what's so nuts is that they're the defense attorneys. So they were going to meet with Richard Allen, and every time they were, those same exact prison guards with the Odinist patches were present when they were having their conversations, where there was supposed to be this sort of private engagement with your defense attorneys. They obviously weren't even granted that, so they had no attorney client privilege at any real extent. And then the individuals who were present were obviously acting in bad faith and a part of the network that were helping facilitate the cover up. And so it looks like whenever the defense attorneys made it public that these individuals were members of that Odinist group, their patches mysteriously vanished from their prison guard uniforms. It's insane, and the judge was obviously read in on this corrupt, obvious miscarriage of justice, because in every way they refused to allow the defense attorneys to even make a case. They wouldn't allow the Odinism defense to be even heard publicly in trial throughout the court case. It's fascinating. And it really is a perfect example of what is wrong with modern society, because what inevitably happens is an individual who is a career prison guard at these very same Indiana prisons would then take a political path and become attempt to get elected for public office in Indiana. And it turns out this was all on an anti-gun control sort of campaign, right? Political campaign. And uh, and so it turns out that this individual actually is directly affiliated with the Odinism organization in that area. And he inevitably shows up because there was a task force, a federal task force of three individuals who were placed on the Odinism priority as investigating the Odinist ties to the crime scene. That was specifically what this task force was designed to do.
And they kept that out.
And they kept that out. And worse than that, they actually disrupted the entire task force and had it entirely just as far as the task force itself was obviously shut down in terms of one of the individuals was lured out by that very same prison guard who decided to drive to the federal building in Indiana, throw pipe bombs up at the federal building while he's waiting out at his truck, and then entice and provoke the one federal agent that is actively pursuing the Odinist ties to the crime scene out to the front steps of the federal building and shoot him in broad daylight, and then escape unharmed to the local hospital to receive attention for their injuries. So,
That's crazy.
I mean, how fascinating. And then another individual who was on that very same task force that wasn't killed, he tried to blow the whistle and they ruined his career. They legitimately launched these smear campaigns, tried to claim that he acted in bad faith on another case, and essentially that was all trumped up charges that were manufactured from within internally, and it was all to undermine his credibility. And at the end of the day, he was forced into retirement after they tried to even send him to prison, which
Yeah.
It's fascinating how much this happens.
It's weird that people can't come to grips that these elites are actually worshiping these gods, right? And I went to college. I'm not going to say the name of this person, but his father was a very powerful person. And he ran a studio, and
Mhm.
I remember him telling me how every single year, and this is before I knew anything about conspiracies or anything like that. He said
Right.
every single year his father would go to this meeting up in the redwood forest and they'd meet for a week together and that's where they would set the agenda. I'm like, what are you talking about, set the agenda? He's like, dude, I don't know how it works, but they just all the power brokers, set the agenda. And then fast forward 15 years, I'm doing some research and he was going to Bohemian Grove.
Bohemian
And
Grove.
what I try to tell people is the most powerful people in the world do not take a week out of their schedule to go make mock sacrifices to an owl to be edge lords. No, these people truly believe in this stuff, and that's where they derive their power from.
Exactly. And that's why, like, I focus so often on this sort of intersection of culture creation, social engineering, and kind of covert intelligence operations, obviously, but there's also this bridge. There's like this kind of avenue of where they all intersect at with esoteric occult ideologies, and
Yeah.
utilizing this what is essentially just a subconscious initiation of what I believe to be. Now, obviously, the general public isn't quite, they're not at all initiates of the organization and the network and benefit from it. But I'm saying through the subconscious practice of the ritual itself, engaging in it, at any level is sort of a victory for them. And it feels like they use these various methods of deception and symbolism, right? And occult iconography in many ways to kind of uh, just evoke that very energy and
Well, those symbols are
emotional.
powerful. And
Yes.
I'm super schizo, to use your word, when it comes to this stuff. See, I think everything we see in this material realm is
Mhm.
first initiated in a spiritual realm that somehow
Very
mesh
much
to
so.
ours. And that these fallen gods and these demonic type entities carry out these orders through these people. I really believe that because when you look at all the worldly governors and all these bloodlines, they're just lack of the compassion, this demonic like presence that they put out. To me, that's the only explanation.
Man, it really seems to be that way, honestly, as far as I'm concerned. And
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so many examples that we can use, and I think that just through the mentioning of Oswald, obviously, just being potentially in a Nazi breeding experiment, as I had explained earlier. I mean, it's just knowing their connection to the Black priesthood and dark magic, and I mean, this. Not only did David Ferry have mind control manuals and manuals on hypnotism in his apartment whenever he was murdered, in that context, when he was running the Civil Air Patrol, Lee Harvey Oswald was a teenager, and legitimately, he was sexually abusing his Civil Air Patrol cadets while they were under hypnosis, which is insane to me. That not only Lee Harvey Oswald was a member, but so was Barry Seal. And it
Oh, the
seems.
guy who drove the plane?
Yes, yes, and yeah, and good old Barry Seal, that apparently, according to Tom Cruise's movie American Made, he just, man, he was so just disillusioned by his day-to-day process of just being a pilot for some sort of what, United Airlines or something, that he obviously, oh, he had to smuggle in cigars, right? It was like the most ridiculous, when in reality he's smuggling in like massive sort of and just these ridiculous detonator cords, like bombs, like insane amounts beyond like legitimately bringing in who was he, as far as the Iran Contra aspect of Barry Seal's connections, the Nicaraguans, he's like bringing into the U.S., right? It's just so funny to me. But
That's crazy how there's all those connections, how different people show up at the same places. And just a modern idea of that is Thomas Massey. He was
oh
part
man,
of Demolay International, which is named after the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, but also Bill Clinton was part of that. Also, Walt Disney was part of that.
Of course. There's no way around the fact that I believe, I mean, Thomas Massey seems to have been assigned his new sort of honeypot situation, and to some extent with his newly acquired wife, which
Yeah,
is
right.
that in itself, man, come
Got
on,
his
man.
cool new do, lost the glasses, you know.
Hey, he's getting a sort of what's it called? That they're doing a makeover for him, but for it's the same thing that Gavin Newsom has received, right? As far as just this kind of new public persona that is attempting to be kind of yeah, re-engineered and manufactured for public appeal in terms of an upcoming bid. It very much seems like Thomas Massey is a false solution waiting in the wind to demoralize you further, because once that, if that ever did come to fruition, you would then begin to realize, at least to some extent, some of the individuals who still are on board with engaging with the political process in that way, it'll only lead them into becoming more and more disillusioned, hopefully. But that takes it's a process, and it takes too much time, unfortunately. And I see people that I admire and respect and appreciate just fall victim to
I'm
this
with you.
kind of,
It's hard to watch
yeah,
people I respect fall for it. And the point is, I hope they do become disillusioned with it. The
me too.
risk is that they don't put their energy or their spirit towards something good like God.
True. True.
They, carry out their own earthly agenda, which is what they want, by the way, folks, right? To
Yeah.
usher in this new technocratic system, they need the old system to fall and collapse, which means we have to
Mhm.
become disillusioned with it, right? So this is all part of the big plan. So we got about 5 minutes left.
Oh shit.
Anything
Okay.
else? Yeah, we went through this. I set it up for 2 hours and 10 minutes, and
Hey, buddy. Let me
had a
know
great
if we can
time.
do a I had a great time, but I definitely had a goal of presenting a little bit more in a kind of I don't know, efficient and effective way. But if you're interested, I'm always down to do a
Yeah.
part two, brother, because that
Well,
seems to be yeah, just I don't know. These days, I can't seem to have a conversation and get anything done within the context of less than 4 hours. I don't know what's
Egg, well,
wrong with
there's
me.
so much, especially because what you do, and like I said, what I love about what you do is you get into the details, right? Like you get into the connections, and I don't have the time or the even the brain. That's not the way my brain operates, right? I like to see that, but I'm so reliant on the stuff that you put out. And I think everybody else who listens to this, if you want to get into the nitty gritty, Austin is your man.
Thank you, buddy. That means the world to me, my friend. And with that being said, I'll first introduce this individual, and then we'll show his picture. And if we have any more time, yeah, I don't know. We'll probably have to table the Paul Schultz, connection to the Star Chamber and the White Eagle Underground. But my God, I think understanding the Michael Aquino connection to Columbine, like we're talking priority target for their genealogical background to then essentially have a child with that person and effectively set them up to become a prioritized target for a fertility death ritual. And then the child would be tapped into the upper echelon of the leadership within the Star Chamber of the White Eagle Underground and the Brotherhood of the White Temple. And
This is with Michael Kino.
this was Michael Aquino. This is insane. So maybe I should just tell you that real quick before we go. Are you?
Yeah,
Do you want me to? Okay, we
we
can
got we
talk
got
about.
4 minutes.
Okay, let's see if I can do it
All
because
right,
we can talk about Oswald and
we'll do a
his
part
Nazi
two. We'll do
brain
a part
experiment
two.
later. Okay, awesome. So this is nuts to me. And again, it was what felt like some sort of proverbial smoking gun in terms of this confidential investigative memorandum that I found, and it pertains to that of the White Eagle Underground, which I've been discussing. And this is fascinating because this is connected back to the White Eagle Lodge and an individual by the name of Maurice Doriel. And Maurice Doriel, if you look him up, he essentially established this occult organization called the White Eagle Underground through the White Eagle Lodge. So he has these connections to a secret society, a fraternal organization, but the White Eagle Underground effectively promote themselves as they essentially are still recruiting to this day and claimed to be a new age organization, a sort of a revolutionary church that basically practice and teach the Kabbalah, the Akashic records. And there was one other thing that it was like, check every box, please, right? To a certain extent. And so it turns out that the implication behind this memorandum was that the group itself was actually a cult consisting of high level rogue intelligence agents and foreign terrorist operatives. Now, again, keep in mind, this memorandum being filed internally by an investigator who is local. So I think he stumbled on to a network that he could not comprehend. Right? This is sort of the scope of it is incomprehensible to this individual. I think for the vast majority of people who would even imagine coming across something like this. But in the context of this case, it had to have been just almost paradigm shifting for this person. I couldn't even imagine what he went
Yeah.
through, especially following the consequential result of what this organization was pursuing. They had headquarters, they had geographical locations all over, hubs all over the domestic U.S., and were allegedly prioritizing staging a mass casualty terrorist event in New York City. And this is all in 1998, just before 9/11 takes place,
Surprise,
obviously.
surprise.
And
Could you
so
imagine stumbling upon that, not realizing what you're getting into? Like
and then 9/11
this
happens.
occult satanic organization's talking about this attack, and you're like,
Mhm.
what is going on here?
Right. 9/11 happens, I'd be like, I'm done. I retire. God, I have to reflect on what I think life is in general.
You know, it's
But
funny, real quick, and I'll add this last thing with this. When you start learning about this, so I have a buddy whose brother actually worked at Area 51 for
wow.
4 years, but he wasn't allowed to talk about it to him or anybody. But I'll tell you a funny story real quick. He went in and he was some type of engineer. I forget what it was. He went in an atheist, lasted 4 years there, couldn't handle it anymore, left and became a Christian. So that tells you all you need
Wow.
to know about what these, deep government, secret
Yeah,
society
buddy.
type things are doing.
At the end of the day, it's spiritual warfare,
It is.
right?
That's what it
It
is. Yeah.
is. Yeah, I agree. And but this is so just an insane story as far as this investigative memorandum. It was dated for March 31st, 97, and it was regarding a felony case of child abuse involving a man by the name of Paul Schultz. And so the subject line read The Star Chamber and White Eagle Underground. And apparently, according to the background in the memorandum, the investigator received a call prior to Thanksgiving of 97 from a woman who was living in Cypress, Texas, that was a Houston suburb, and her name was Belinda Schultz. She was 41 at the time, and she disclosed that she had learned about the inquiry into white supremacist terrorism centering on New York City through a third party. So apparently, one of the psychotherapists present at the Dallas office, where an investigation had been conducted just a few weeks prior, apparently, but was all this information was allegedly relayed about the inquiry to a cult investigator in the Houston area who was close to Miss Schultz. He apparently is the one who explained this to the investigator, and so Miss Schultz then actually directly contacted him and relates the details of her case over the telephone. So what he says she relates to him was in a manner that sounded extremely professional and credible. So throughout the whole memorandum, he goes to bat for her character. He essentially claims that she is the most credible person in reference to an individual that would come to him with such extraordinary sort of allegations. He was attempting to actually define her as fully credible, and even mentioned her stature in the community as being somewhat just as far as legitimizing her in a way, and so yeah, it seems as if she's not her credibility is intact, at least is the way to put it. But so she
We
then
got 2 minutes. Just so you
faxes.
know, we got 2 minutes.
Okay, awesome. She then
Cool.
faxes all these pages of background information, as far as even including a police report. And in this case, was entirely centered on felony abuse charges, child abuse charges that were filed against her ex-husband, Paul Schultz, in Brazoria County, south of Houston. So the ex-husband had sodomized her son Nicholas, who was only 6 years old at the time, and in a severe manner. Apparently, this lasted for over a period of many months. The sodomy had allegedly taken place in the context of satanic and or Luciferian cult activity perpetrated by associates of Paul Schultz. The cult is also neo-Nazi in its political aims and seems to be associated with terrorist planning, particularly bombings and assassinations. Child witnesses repeatedly describe personnel wearing Nazi uniforms and insignia, as well as portraits and acts of veneration for Adolf Hitler. Over 2 months, beginning in mid January of 97, continuing through March, the same investigator interviewed numerous people who had knowledge of the case and knew Belinda Schultz personally and also her husband. The investigator apparently did not interview the child directly, but had been present on several occasions when the child apparently offered information spontaneously to his mother or was gently questioned by his mother about the case. And so basically, he gets into the fact that essentially this individual was what had a prior, I believe he had a prior a marriage with another child that he had apparently had with that prior marriage or that first wife. But it seems like there was a member named Carlton Collier of a key representative of a Justice for All, a representative apparently of this advocacy group and citizens advocacy group, and apparently there was a 4 hour presentation that Belinda Schultz gave to this citizens advocacy group. And this is so crazy because this happened in the summer of 96. And so the group took a significant interest in her case and was pursuing it just before a tragic death of that group's leader, named Pam Lynchner, who died in the crash of TWA Flight 800. So it looks like that flight was potentially an arranged crash, very similar to that of Dorothy Hunt, the E. Howard Hunt's wife, during the Watergate fallout.
Okay.
Yeah, so she was the pay mistress who was running money back and forth to the individuals who were a part of the Watergate scandal and some of the clandestine operatives who were involved. So she's paying them off on behalf of her husband, but also because she's essentially blackmailing the Nixon administration at the time. And basically, she takes a flight to go provide a payoff to one of the key individuals who supplied the bugs, right, for the surveillance of the Watergate, to E. Howard Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy. She goes up there to pay off the individual who owned that organization that provided the bugs, the surveillance bugs. And on her flight there, apparently there were at least like a dozen other individuals on the flight manifest that were entirely let's just say they were priority targets in terms of the establishment of the time. And yeah, inevitably this plane crashes early before reaching the tarmac. And it looks as if, once you look a little bit into the case, within the first 5 minutes, you have over 50 federal agents on the scene before anyone else was there. No local authorities, no one.
Well, they're
And
probably
all,
making sure if she's dead.
exactly. And also apparently at the airport itself, where they were supposed to actually descend and make their landing safely, they had infiltrated, right, the individuals who were in the tower at that airport and had essentially kind of ran the operation from within. And so you had members of the who were employed at the airport at the time who were kind of blowing the whistles, saying that all these feds showed up and kind of took over the kind of just the daily operation aspect of things as the crash takes place, which is all perfectly orchestrated and timed. But
Hey,
anyway, I'll shut up. We have so much more
hey,
to talk about.
we'll do
I'm
part
sorry,
two for
brother.
sure. One last time, where can they find you?
Awesome, buddy. So everyone, if you're interested at all in anything that I've said and you would like to kind of engage with my content further, then the Underclass podcast definitely the best place. If you have the means to support me and anything I've ever said resonated with you, then obviously the Patreon is the best place for that. At least there's some incentive there. I have a paywalled show with Brad Binkley and Sam Tripoli called Whatever This Is, and it's a lot of fun, man.
Yeah.
It definitely, I feel like anytime I get the chance to talk to them, they both like very much ground me and bring me back to reality. And also, man, it feels like I'm just talking to my buddies,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
much like this, right? So it's just something that, and it provides me with hope moving forward. And it kind of inspires me to remain steadfast on this very same path and uh and really just keep pursuing opportunities to have conversations with people that share those principles, and want to live by the law of abundance and kind of, yeah, the law of attraction is real, and I feel like if you have good intentions, and you apply yourself in a sort of disciplined manner, and you're on a daily basis hoping to reflect and become a better person, then you'll only end up in a better position, so I couldn't
Hey,
thank you more for the opportunity, brother.
perfect way to end that. And you know what? I believe that's all God wants from us, right? Let's have a relationship with
Absolutely.
our creator and we love our neighbor like we love ourselves and put out good thoughts, right?
Absolutely, man.
All
I
right,
agree.
sir. We're going to end it there. And thank you so much.